Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. People across the state are still prisoners to their addictions, and the problem is worse for those who've been behind bars.
While I was in jail, they came and asked me if I'd screened me for the program and asked if I wanted to participate in it.
How a Marion County program is trying to get help to people where it can. Plus, we join a community in looking back at the life of Holocaust survivor Eva Kor. And we head out to America's latest national park.
We knew it would be somewhat of a big deal, but we really didn't realize how much of a big deal it was going to be to so many folks in the public.
Indiana Dunes lands on the national map. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Well, as family and friends gather for the funeral of Holocaust survivor Eva Kor this weekend, Hoosiers are honoring her in another way. As Barbara Brosier reports, tributes to her impact on the world continue to pour in.
People gathered at the Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Terre Haute throughout the week to remember Eva Kor's legacy. She founded the museum and dedicated her life to sharing her story of survival and forgiveness. People traveled from all over to visit a memorial set up inside.
Her openness to talk about not only her past, but her openness to talk about her process of learning how to forgive will be the best lesson I could take from it.
The museum will host a candle lighting ceremony in Kor's honor Saturday. Then the staff will settle into its new normal next week. While Kor is gone, they say she will live on through the museum.
We've had these plans for a while to have two sites, to have an Eva Kor Center in Terre Haute and have a state Holocaust museum in Indianapolis. And I think if anything, it pushes us faster to get her message out there in the most impactful way.
Simpson says the best way to honor Kor is to keep her story alive.
And then her life lessons are to never give up, to be kind, and to forgive. And so if we can take those and think about each day and what can we do today to make the world a better place, you're honoring her legacy.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Barbara Brosier.
Nearly 20% of people sentenced to state prison or jail report regular opioid use. Tolerance to opioids goes down while incarcerated, putting people at higher risk of an overdose when they're released. Because of this risk, jails are being pressed to provide treatment before people are released from custody. But it's still not the common practice nationally. Just a few years ago in Marion County, Indiana, the Corrections Department began running its own addiction recovery program, focusing on people who have committed felonies. And as Benta Boutier reports, the program includes intensive counseling and drug therapy for its clients.
Jamie DiMartino of Indianapolis struggled with heroin addiction for about 12 years. She tried various methods to get clean.
Basically everything you could think of.
But nothing stuck. She'd start using again and eventually ended up in Marion County's jail.
While I was in jail, they came and asked me if I'd screened me for the program and asked if I wanted to participate in it.
The program starts with a 2-week detox before starting clients on medically assisted treatment. There are a few medications commonly used like Suboxone and Methadone. Marion County's program uses one of the newer options, Vivitrol, which is a monthly shot that helps suppress the desire for opioids. This is different from other treatments because it doesn't need to be taken daily.
I think the fact that it's a shot and it lasts for 28 days, it kind of takes, like everything else you can just not take that day and then decide to go get high.
Director of Drug and Alcohol Services for the Marion County Probation Department, Anthony Williams, wrote the program.
We specifically chose Vivitrol as the component for this program because of that extended time frame that the drug allows, the 28 days for the injection.
One shot costs up to $1,500. DiMartino says her insurance covered most of that. People are screened for the program based on their motivation to participate and how likely they are to be a repeat offender. Participants convicted of a level 6 felony or higher who are addicted to opioids qualify for the program. It usually takes about a year to complete.
The grant specifically states that we have to have people in the program that are of moderate or higher risk to reoffend.
Judge Clark Rogers of the Marion County Superior Court oversees the program. Once someone agrees to take part in the program, they don't leave the Marion County Jail until they've had their first injection of Vivitrol.
And they enter what we call the intensive phase of supervision.
This intensive phase of supervision usually lasts 45 days, and the participant is electronically monitored the whole time, and they're on home detention. Then they move on to the secondary phase, where they're electronically monitored but can leave the house.
So we kind of know where they're going when they're out in the community, but don't have them on that restrictive that they have to just stay at home if they're not going to probation work or treatment.
Then they move on to the final phase, which is similar to regular probation. Participants receive counseling and therapy during all 3 of the program's phases. There are indications the program is working. Judge Rogers says people come to his court and request to participate now.
That kind of tells me that they're in a position that that they're done on the heroin. They want to stop. They want to get treatment. They want to get the help they need to get off the drugs.
Right now, 10 people are enrolled in the program. But Williams and Rogers want more grant money so they can extend the treatment program to people who have committed minor offenses as well as felonies. They say it's people like DiMartino who inspire them to keep it going. She graduated from the program this spring. Now she works in a restaurant in Indianapolis and lives with her boyfriend and his daughter.
A year from now, I would like to maybe look into buying a house. I've been able to save a lot of money. I'm about to get my license back and get a car and just be a normal person again.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Benta Boutier.
Now for headlines, we go over to Barbara Brozier, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thanks, Joe. Indiana has a $2.3 billion surplus. That's an increase of $500 million more in reserves than a year ago. The governor is proposing some of that money be spent on several planned construction projects. GOP members support it and say it will save money in the long term. But House Democrats say Republicans value, in their words, hoarding money over improving human infrastructure. Indiana Democrats have their first official candidate for governor in the 2020 cycle. Former state health commissioner and healthcare executive Woody Myers announced his bid earlier this week, where he suggested his political inexperience could be an advantage.
I'm running for governor because Indiana has too many pre-existing conditions that typical politicians just can't treat.
Myers, a physician, ran for Congress in 2008. He says his priorities are teacher pay, infant mortality rates, and health care costs. Republican Governor Eric Holcomb is expected to officially launch his re-election bid tomorrow. And a familiar face is entering the race for the congressional seat Susan Brooks is vacating. Christina Hale served in the General Assembly from 2012 until 2016, when she left to run unsuccessfully for lieutenant governor. Hale will face Democrat Dee Thornton in the primary. A panel of legal experts agree with the city of Bloomington's decision not to ban a farmer's market vendor with alleged ties to neo-Nazis.
Lies are protected by the First Amendment. You know, strange but true.
Schooner Creek owner Sarah Dye has allegedly posted on a white supremacist website and met with Nolan Brewer, a white supremacist convicted of vandalizing a synagogue in Carmel. Most who attended the legal panel discussion asked if there was a way the city could ban Schooner Creek from the market. One Bloomington resident says while she has concerns about the vendor, she understands why Dye gets to stay.
Bloomington is a liberal town, but when a more conservative town uses our precedent to just remove vendors that don't share our views, that would be disastrous.
Meanwhile, a judge denied a request yesterday for a restraining order against a Bloomington man who was accused of harassing Dye. The Indiana Forest Alliance is lobbying to preserve nearly 2,400 acres of the Morgan Monroe and Yellowwood State Forest from future logging. As Sean Hogan reports, the Alliance says only 2% of Indiana state forests are protected from deforestation.
The Indiana Forest Alliance is proposing that the entire Yellowwood backcountry area be labeled as a high conservation value forest. Currently, 300 of the nearly 2,700 acres are protected. The dominant trees in the backcountry average 110 years. The Alliance says fewer than 2% of forests in the state are that old. The designation means the area would be considered instrumental in conserving plant and animal life. The Division of Forestry Wildlife Specialist Scott Halton says logging in that section would only be allowed in rare situations.
In most cases, those nature preserves have in their articles of designation what the management prescription is, and typically forest timber harvesting is not part of that.
There would be an option for trees to be removed if they presented a hazard, such as a dead tree that might be leaning and pose a threat to a hiker. IFA Executive Director Jeff Stan says the proposal would allow the forest to retain its natural old-growth state.
Older, dead, and dying trees are fundamentally important to the functioning of a forest ecosystem. Without that, forests die.
The official proposal from the IFA will be published on the Division of Forestry's website and will be open to public comment. However, there's no timeline for that yet. A review committee comprised of members of the Division of Forestry and possibly other experts will ultimately vote on whether to accept the proposal. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Sean Hogan.
That's a debate we see every year, Joe, whether logging is good and healthy for the state's forests.
Barbara, thank you very much. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Surveillance cameras dot the Bloomington skyline. Police and city government have hundreds of them across the city. As part of our City Limits series, we talk to city leaders and concerned citizens about how they use those cameras. And from state landmark to national park, we look at the hilly ride of Indiana's only national park. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
The WTIU WFIU news team connects Indiana to the world. We bring you the top news of the day on radio, TV, and online. We round up the stories that have people talking each week and dig deep into the issues that affect your community the most. The WTIU WFIU news team is where you are and telling your story.
In a time of change, where can you find in-depth reporting and thoughtful analysis? Washington Week on PBS. Join moderator Robert Costa.
When I was at the Capitol this week, I encountered the same.
And a panel of award-winning journalists.
You're seeing a divided nation, and you're seeing.
For insights and perspective.
Tonight there was a key development in the Senate.
You won't find anywhere else.
What a week.
Washington Week.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Federal officials are providing low-interest disaster loans to help home and small business owners after the recent severe weather outbreaks. Loans are available to residents of Monroe and the 6 counties surrounding it. A homeowner can borrow up to $200,000 with an interest rate as low as 1.9% up to 30 years. An assistance center in Ellettsville is open through next week.
We're going to be there until next Thursday. I encourage people to stop in. It's the best 35 minutes you can spend in the aftermath of a disaster to determine if you can qualify.
Dawson says loan eligibility isn't focused on credit score as much as an individual's ability to pay the loan back. Well, it's not just businesses and homeowners that are still reeling from the destruction left behind from recent storms. Just a month after completing the new boardwalk at Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve, the storm knocked down countless trees, some of which damaged that new boardwalk. We went out to survey the damage and see what the folks at Sycamore Land Trust are doing to get the boardwalk back open.
We had a crew out here every day for about 10 months rebuilding this beautiful boardwalk trail. And we reopened just on May 18th, so about 2 months ago. Not even. And less than a month after that, the tornado that came through Ellettsville just wiped out a lot of the trees in the area, and it really hit Bean Blossom Bottoms pretty hard. It's just one of our most beloved public nature preserves. We've got about a 2-mile trail, an elevated boardwalk trail that takes you out through the swamp and the forest. First, what we had to do was just come out and kind of see what had happened, survey the damage, and see how extensive it was. And it was bigger, I think, than we had hoped it would be. So we just realized it's a pretty big cleanup process. It's hard on us. We thought we were done with the work here for a while. Your work is never done in conservation, obviously. You're always stewarding the land. We didn't think we'd be out here with chainsaws. Most of the damage was done to the trees. The boardwalk actually held up really well, but trees falling on it, they're going to break it and bend it, and you can see that in some spots here. You can see we've already done a lot of work to clean that up, but what we're really doing is just trying to get the trees off the boardwalk. We expect a couple months of work out here. We know that people are really eager to help. It's really amazing how much people have jumped at wanting to help. In the meantime, there's not a lot they can do to volunteer because we really need these small expert crews. But what people can do is support Sycamore financially. So learning how to become a member at our website, sycamorelandtrust.org, is the best way people can help right now. What we see here is destruction and trees falling, and it is heartbreaking, and that's valid. But I think this place is going to continue to thrive as it has. And when a tree falls, it doesn't stop being habitat. You know, it just creates a different kind of habitat. It's going to be taken over by moss and fungi and little bugs and critters, and it's just going to become something new.
Our education reporter Jeannie Lindsay joins us now to talk about the State Board of Education's decisions to get tens of millions of dollars back from 2 virtual schools after a meeting this week. Jeannie, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 2 of these virtual schools have to get back, what, about $40 million?
Yeah.
What happened?
So basically what happened was these 2 schools, they're virtual charter schools. So kids go to school online, they do coursework through computers and work with their teachers that way. Well, the district that oversees these 2 charters raised some red flags earlier this year when they saw data that showed kids weren't earning credits and they weren't actively engaged. And so they initially wanted to revoke the charters for these 2 schools, but ultimately landed on an agreement where one closed this year and then one will close June after this following school year. So the state is auditing these schools now too, and the early findings of this audit say that these schools inflated their enrollment numbers and reported double the number of kids than were actually taking classes and received state funding for it. And so the state board voted this week to essentially get the state its money back for kids who weren't actually being educated.
So how does something like this happen? What are these schools thinking?
Yeah, so that's kind of the million-dollar question at this point. Daleville's superintendent, their position has been there's a lack of policy and guidance around virtual charter schools. The superintendent of the schools is also complaining about a lack of regulation at the state level. State board members pushed back on that a little bit and said the charter agreement was weak, but this all is just a bunch of different factors focused on policy and regulation and guidance for how this should work.
So then now the follow-up would be what happens now? I mean, will there be some follow-up to this so that it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, so the audit is still ongoing, so we don't know how far this goes yet. The state examiner said that it could be in criminal territory, so if there are criminal findings, there could be prosecution. But in the meantime, the schools will be closely monitored by the department while they wind things down and try and pay back this money.
All right, Jeannie, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Surveillance cameras are a key part of suppressing an entire ethnic group in China. Use of facial recognition is growing rapidly, and individual privacy is being questioned across the globe. As part of our City Limits series, Tyler Lake looks at use of surveillance cameras a little closer to home.
Bloomington resident Carl Pearson has seen the security cameras hanging from light poles in parks and downtown areas of the city. He says the cameras have changed the atmosphere in the parks, and he wants to know more about how the city and the police use them.
I would like to know how many security cameras there are in Bloomington, and I would like to know how the police use those security cameras, to what end, and their effects.
As far as the Bloomington Police Department goes, officials say besides the ones immediately outside the police station, they only have 6 cameras up in the city, 1 in Seminary Square Park, and the rest are clustered in the downtown core.
They're along the Kirkwood Avenue, I guess east of Walnut. There's one at Kirkwood and Washington, Kirkwood and Lincoln, Kirkwood and Grant, that are all clearly labeled with police. They have the department patch on the side of them.
Pettigo says BPD only accesses the footage if a crime is reported.
They are not monitored all the time. They do record, and it usually saves the video footage for at least a couple weeks, and then it just simply overwrites the footage.
But Pearson says he worries that cameras meant to address crime end up affecting everyone else.
When you saturate an area with surveillance cameras, you are solving the potential problems perhaps, but you're also causing other people's behaviors to change simply because they're on camera.
Pettigo says the police department doesn't want to change the average person's behavior, but it also doesn't want to hide the fact that the area is under surveillance. He also said that the cameras aren't used very frequently in investigations.
It's very rare. I can't give you I don't know a number, but it's rare.
And he said this when I asked him a question Pearson had about whether the cameras are meant for suppression of crime or documenting it.
You know, I honestly think a little bit of both. When we put the cameras up along Kirkwood, we wanted to make sure that they were very clearly labeled, that they were police department cameras. They say police in bold lettering. They have the department patch on the side of them.
But that's just a handful of cameras, a drop in the bucket compared to the cameras owned by the city of Bloomington.
So there are 294 cameras in our inventory over about 12 different sites. The bulk of those are in our parking garages.
Renaison says city leaders have put a lot of thought into the tension between security and privacy.
There's a fine line between surveillance and security. I think we are on the side of we're just using this for security and for after-the-fact incidents.
He says the first cameras the city installed were in response to concerns from the community about safety. And the city has plans to install even more cameras. About 50 of them are planned for the new Switchyard Park, which will stretch over a mile when it's complete. He echoes Pettigo in saying that no one is watching city cameras in real time, and all the video they capture is deleted after 30 days. But the police department can access footage from more than just police and city-owned cameras. More and more businesses also have their own cameras, and they seem to come standard with new construction.
You know, basically every new building that you see going up has surveillance cameras, you know, on all corners and in parking garages, stairwells, things like that. And we do use those for investigations.
And he says most businesses and property owners are happy to share their footage to help the police in an investigation. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Tyler Lake.
Well, a simple name change is having a big impact on a popular Indiana tourist destination. Adam Pinsker tells us why more people are flocking to Indiana Dunes National Park.
It's been about 6 months since the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore was officially designated Indiana Dunes National Park, the first national park in the state of Indiana and the 61st national park in the country.
But certainly what we've seen is once our name changed, there's been a huge number of people who have contacted us, and they're looking at Indiana Dunes, in some cases for the first time.
Park spokesperson Bruce Rowe says that includes a photographer who stopped publication on a book about all the national parks so he can make sure the newest park, Indiana Dunes, was included. Even with a cool, wet spring, 126,000 more people visited Indiana Dunes between January and May of 2019 compared to the same time in 2018.
We knew it would be somewhat of a big deal, but we really didn't realize how much of a big deal it was going to be to so many folks in the public.
Efforts to make the area a national park began more than a century ago, but it didn't become reality until Governor Eric Holcomb convinced President Trump to sign the bill into law earlier this year. But the story of the dunes goes back to the Ice Age. After massive glaciers carved out the Great Lakes, the dunes started forming thanks to windblown sand.
The prevailing winds here are from the north, so a lot of that sand gets carried to the southern end of the lake. Some of it ends up on the beach.
Over time, these dunes grew, some of them nearly 200 feet high. As the shoreline receded over the centuries, older dunes became a habitat for a variety of plants.
We've got some of the greatest botanical diversity literally in the country right here in 15,000 acres, just an hour from Chicago.
And Bruce says there might not have ever even been a national park here if it weren't for the foresight of conservationists decades ago.
All these natural areas probably would have been lost, either to industrial development or residential development or other commercial use.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Adam Pinsker.
And that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.